Everyone, I think we're going to give folks a second to trickle in, and then we'll go ahead and get started. But really excited to see the numbers taken up. Okay, well, it is 12:01, and I know we have a packed schedule today, and this is being recorded, so I think it makes sense to go ahead and get started. I don't know, Navina's ready to start sharing slides.
I'll share those right now, Kelsey.
Thanks, Navina. Okay, welcome everyone to the Pennsylvania and Federal Funding Opportunities webinar. Again, we are so excited to see these numbers creeping up and have you with us today. My name is Kelsey Brooks, and I'm a program manager with the Environmental Finance Center at the University of Maryland. Before we get started, I want to thank, of course, the Water Center at Penn for organizing and putting on this webinar today, our speakers for attending and taking time out of their schedule to talk about these funding opportunities, and everyone who is joining us today to attend. A little bit of housekeeping. We are sharing this event as a webinar, so that means for attendees, you're not going to be able to come off mute to ask questions, but we do want to capture any questions that you have throughout the session today. You should see at the bottom of the screen a Q&A button, and so at any time, please put questions that you have into that Q&A submission. At the end, we'll have some time for Q&A. My colleague Ellen Kohler will be moderating that for us, but it'll also let us capture any questions that we might not be able to get to today, and then maybe can answer, in follow-up email. So once again, click that Q&A button anytime during the webinar. We are happy to answer questions. Next slide. So once again, Kelsey Brooks, Program Manager with the Environmental Finance Center at the University of Maryland. EFC is part of a national network of environmental finance centers that provides funding and financing assistance to communities, in our case, throughout EPA Region 3. Next slide. And we are close partners with the Water Center at Penn that also works to partner with communities to identify integrated solutions to challenges facing their water systems and watersheds, focusing on water equity, water resilience, water leadership, and water innovation. Next slide. And we are able to come to you today as part of what is called a Water Infrastructure Environmental Finance Center. So under the bipartisan infrastructure legislation passed by the Biden administration, some additional environmental finance centers were created to provide specific technical assistance around drinking water, wastewater, and stormwater. And the Water Center at Penn is our lead in the state of Pennsylvania with support from us. So in addition to me here today, once again, joined by my colleague Ellen Kohler, who is the Director of Applied Research and Programs, and she will be handling the Q&A. And Navina Rocco, who is a research specialist who've been getting all the emails for and is our fearless coordinator, and none of us would be able to do this without her. So thank you both again for putting on this webinar. Next slide. So the goal of this Water Technical Assistance Program is to get more communities with applications for federal funding, state funding, really funding to be able to have quality water infrastructure and reliable water service. And so once again, we will be having our colleagues from state, federal agencies talk about what some of those funding sources are. Thanks for moving to the next slide, Navina. We're part of a team across Region 3 that involves some additional technical assistance providers. So we're able to, through our TA, provide direct assistance around drinking water and wastewater operations. Next slide. And we do this through a couple of means: direct TA to assist to communities one-on-one, supporting communities and taking concrete steps towards accessing, once again, that funding, and coordinating and collaborating to support effective delivery of water TA, this webinar being a great example of that number 3, principle of technical assistance. And this is just a very broad overview of what the services we offer through this process are. So everything from planning, assessment, assistance with community engagement, through program management. We aim to work with 40 and 60 communities across EPA Region 3. We've done quite a bit of our work in Pennsylvania, and that's very exciting. We know there's a lot of small jurisdictions and small water systems in the Commonwealth. And so just the range of support that we're able to offer through this service. But we want to get to our speakers and what we're really here to do today, which is, again, provide some information about a range of funding sources that are available either through the state or through federal. So again, thank you so much to our speakers for being with us today. We're very excited to have Tezra Schlupp from PennVest, Shane Kleiner from PADEP, Jake Riley from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, or NIFWF, Terry Provost from the Pennsylvania Department of Economic and Community Development CDBG program, Linda Thomas from USDA, Gianna Rosati from EPA's Thriving Communities Grant Making Program. And I don't want to take up any more time giving the background information, so I'm happy to turn things over to Tezra to start with PennVest.
Good morning. Thank you for having me here today for this broad overview of PennVest funding. My name is Tess Schlupp. I am the Senior Project Manager and South Central Regional Project Specialist for PennVest. Since its inception, PennVest has served the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's citizens by funding sewer, drinking water, stormwater, and non-point source projects throughout PA. These projects not only contribute to improving Pennsylvania's environment and the health of its people, they also often provide opportunities for economic growth and job creation. PennVest provides funding for existing problems, so we typically do not fund new development. PennVest also cannot fund projects that have started construction prior to application and subsequent settlement on those fundings. Principal residence funding, which you see here, is financed by PennVest, but administered through the PA Housing and Financing Agency, or PHFA. PHFA administers low-interest loans to homeowners for replacement of septic systems, first-time sewer lateral connections, or replacement of sewer laterals. Next slide, please. So who can receive PennVest funding? We generally fund to municipalities, municipal authorities, private entities, for-profits, not-profits, and private landowners. Drinking water funding, however, is limited to a water supply permit holder. Next slide, please. PennVest does have funding limits. For entities serving one municipality, PennVest is capped at $11 million. 2 or more municipalities served by the system, we can fund as high as $20 million. 4 or more municipalities served by the system, no specified cap limits, but this is assuming funding is available and subject to board approval. Please make note, traditional stormwater projects such as collecting and piping stormwater to a stream is capped at $10 million no matter how many municipalities is served by the system. This does not apply to non-point source projects. Non-point source projects are capped based on municipalities served. There is no match requirement for PennVest. However, we can be used as a match for most other funding sources. PennVest can fund your entire project as long as it does not exceed the maximum limit, or we can be used as a gap funder. Next slide, please. PennVest budget for the 24-25 fiscal year is $1 billion. We divide that $1 billion between 4 board meetings a year. Typically, the board meetings are January, April, July, and October. Each board meeting has a corresponding application cutoff date, which generally falls between 2 months and 3 weeks prior to the board meeting. 2 months and 3 weeks prior to the board meeting. On the date of application cutoff, must have had a planning meeting with PennVest. All necessary permits must be in hand, as well as DEP planning, approval, and environmental clearances. Next slide, please. All PennVest projects start with the planning consultation meeting. Your regional project specialist, along with DEP, meet with you virtually or in person. At this meeting, we discuss your project, timeline, PennVest requirements, technical components, possible funding options, as well as next steps and what to expect. Next slide, please. Possibly the most important information I can give you today is to know who to reach out to at PennVest. The PennVest Regional Project Specialist will be your contact throughout the PennVest process. The project specialist will guide you through the process and be there to assist you with any questions or problems you may encounter. Next slide, please. PennVest staff reviews your application and determine which funding source best fits your needs, so you never have to worry about applying for a specific funding. At the planning meeting, we run through the application, settlement, and disbursement process. After board approval, my legal team helps you walk through the settlement process via conference calls. After settlement, my finance team is there to support you through disbursement. And of course, your PS, your project specialist, is always here to help you. All PennVest processes from application to final disbursement and beyond are online 24/7 for your use. No paper, no travel required. PennVest has changed quite a bit in the last few years. We listened to our stakeholders and developed a smoother, easier, more intuitive process. I encourage you to reach out to your regional project specialist to discuss your water quality needs. Thank you so much for your time today.
Great. Thank you so much, Kelsey, for kicking us off, and Tessra for kicking us off in terms of presentations. Next, I'd like to welcome Shane Kleiner from PADEP, who's going to share his presentation.
All right, let's hope this goes well and quick. All right. Is everything up, Donnie?
Yep.
Navika, sorry.
No, all good.
Right.
I can see it, Shane.
Just real quick, just want to introduce myself. My name is Shane Kleiner. I'm the Watershed Group Manager, a support group manager for the Watershed Sports Section in DEP. A couple of the programs that we're going to be talking about today are our Growing Greener grant program, as well as our 319 grant program. I have a number of different sites here that might be helpful for you when you're looking at any fundings availability for grants that you may be looking for in the future. Just wanted to give you a real quick overview of our program. We have two programs that my section oversees. One of them is the Growing Greener Grant Program, which is a non-point source program that was open across the state. Eligible applicants have to be a 501c3 or municipality or government entity. That does not mean that we don't do work on private properties. It's just that they have to be the grantee that we receive the funding for. I'm just going to go through a couple of things here. Our Growing Greener grant has a $500,000 limit for applications, which can be anywhere from design and permit to construction of projects, everything from agriculture all the way up through the stormwater programs. We are looking at BMP implementation. So even though you may be looking at design and permitting, the BMP applications are also acceptable for doing projects. Real quick, I just wanted to take you to our one site here. As soon as hopefully it connects for me. Here we go. This is a new tool that we have available through our program. Recently, the state of Pennsylvania has a grant finder program, which might be helpful for everybody. If you go into this grant program, what it does is it gives you an application opportunities to go into what grants are open and which ones are available. And for some reason it's not down. Here we go. So as you look through these, there's a number of different programs that are available or grants that are available for individuals, everything from the Chesapeake Bay program, watershed grants, those types of things. And you can find those by going through the list. In those, what there's to representative to be is to be able to look at when those dates are open, what they are available for. All of our grants right now are e-grants. They are able to be done online without having to do paper copies. Both the 319 and Growing Greener grant that I administer open usually right around the right around Earth Day, April 22nd. So keep your eyes open when those come about. But when those are ready to be announced, they will be updated on this page so that you can utilize this page in order to start your process. You can also right now go on to our Growing Greener site. Our Growing Green, what we look for in the grant, what our primers for the funding source are, and be able to look at those uh, applications as you go through the program. So as you go into our website, you can actually look at the Growing Greener Plus program. In here is applications, review materials. You can do tutorials. So that's set up for anybody to be able to get on here to look at what type of agreements we use, what forms we look at, and also what funding will be available for the following year. When we open this up, there will be a new sign at the top. What's new? The new grant application period will show on there when the due date for those grants are and when we're expected to see those grants awarded. Even though our grant period usually is between April and June, due to the time frame it takes to get those through the systems, usually grantees are notified of that grant by December or early January of that year. The 319 program is a federal program for the non-point source program. We also have that available through our system. This is funds that we receive through the federal government that come to us. Part of the reason why we do this in Pennsylvania is to make sure that we get the best projects available to get the best. With the 319 grants, you do have to have what they call a WIP or a watershed initiative plan within that location in which you're going to be utilizing the funds. Otherwise, there are some funds available for some program funds that would go directly through our system within department. But you can also look up on the qualifications and requirements associated with the 319 non-point source program that you can see here. The other one is we do have two new brochures that we're working with right now that we just started. I'm going to bring those up individually. I have them out so that you don't have to go through the system. First one we have here is our Growing Greener Grant brochure, which kind of goes over, the limits that we have, what we're expected to for projects that are being done, everything from stormwater to agriculture to work associated with abandoned mine drainage. You can get these brochures through on my slide to be able to see where those forms come from, or you could contact me directly and we'll be able to get some of those for you. There's also the 319 grant, which I talked to you before. It kind of goes over the details. There's about $3.6 million available through this program. It does take a little longer. Usually the grant applications are the same time that we start in April going through the June. We go through the process. We work with EPA. Those grants are announced the following October. So even though they do not require any match, there is a time frame in between which the grants are submitted to the time they are announced. So that is something to keep in mind when going for these grants. They do take about a year in order for us to get through the system, but then they are announced the following October. So for instance, if we were going to have the grant program for 2025, those grants would be announced the following October 2026, the 1st of October. The big part that I wanted to make sure everybody knew is if you are looking for any of these grants, there are what we call watershed managers located in each region in Pennsylvania under DEP. So if you would like to discuss the Growing Greener grants or looking at possibly a 319 grant, these are the names and numbers for the individuals within. We do have a temporary vacancy in the Southeast. Presently, one of my employees, Trisha Tardo, is the one taking calls and assisting with the program there. But that will be filled fairly soon. So we'll have another person in here and we will update this map so that people know and can identify who is their contact person in the region. Highly recommend contacting these individuals, or if you are if you know your conservation district, each conservation district that's identified here in blue, green, orange, yellow, purple, or teal, each one of those counties have a watershed specialist, might be able to assist you with looking at grant opportunities or even looking at the development of your grant for applying for funding for the following year. Other than that, just wanted to give you a couple other things that I have. I stated who could get the funding, even though you may be a private entity, working with a government entity or working with a 501c3 will make it available for you to receive funds for projects that you're looking at, whether they be stormwater. We do not do water systems. So for instance, if you're looking for safe drinking water systems, we may not be installing those uh, infrastructure, but we do work with the non-point source pollutions associated with that, which would be things affecting your well water, things that would be coming for a reservoir that you'd be working with. So just wanted to let you know. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact us, and thanks for allowing me to participate.
Thank you, Shane. Really appreciate that. Next, we're going to be handing it off to Jake Riley from the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, also known as NFWF. Also, I do want to say if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the Q&A. Like I put in the chat, we'll have time after the presentations are done to address some, hopefully all of these questions. But
Good afternoon here, folks. So Jake Riley, I'm the director of Chesapeake Bay programs at the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation. So be talking to you a little bit, probably most deeply about some Chesapeake Bay focused programs in support of your interests here. Also, just want to note that we do have other programs covering the entire Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. I actually also oversee our Central Appalachia Habitat Stewardship Fund program, which, there's some potential alignment here. Also want to direct folks to our Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund program, another great sort of constellation of grants programs that can support generally some of the interests here represented. And actually a great setup to be able to follow folks at DEP. Most of our programs, or really kind of the most direct connection with our programs and the interest here is really around non-point source pollution control. In our Chesapeake programs, we have two sort of foundational competitive grants programs that are funded primarily through resources from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and specifically their Chesapeake Bay Program Office budget. They're presented here some basic information on this slide. So the first is our Innovative Nutrient and Sediment Reduction Grants program. It's pretty much all there in the title. These are programs that are aimed at supporting on-the-ground watershed restoration projects, specifically in pursuit of nutrient sediment load reductions required under the Chesapeake Bay TMDL and specifically Pennsylvania's Watershed Implementation Plan. This is really about delivering those practices and projects that can assist the Commonwealth meeting its requirements under the Chesapeake Bay TMDL. So not a great fit for, let's say, traditional, infrastructure around, say, drinking water resources or like capital scale stormwater work. But on the non-point source side, great resource for stormwater management projects. Also, there's at least a handful of excellent projects that we've supported through this program focused on drinking water quality. Again, places in, let's say, southeastern Pennsylvania where nitrate concentrations are posing an issue for drinking water, doing non-point source nutrient management practices to be able to help protect and improve drinking water supplies. These programs, fortunately, at least for the next year or two, are benefiting from additional resources through the bipartisan infrastructure law. So for this INSR program, as we call it, we're estimating about $25 to $30 million available. That is across the entire Bay watershed and not just Pennsylvania. So important to provide that context. Awards for the INSR program range from $500,000 up to $2 million. Pretty broad eligibility, including nonprofits and local governments, as folks have also stated, but also things like local government agencies as well. The INSR program does have a requirement or an expectation of roughly 1-to-1 non-federal match being brought. These are federal resources that come through the foundation, so our match requirements are generally thought of in the non-federal sense. In terms of timing here, we actually just closed our annual INSR request for proposals just a couple weeks ago, earlier here in November. For folks to be aware, for our 2026 program, that will open sometime in August of 2025. Proposals will be due November-ish timeframe. So it's kind of a late summer, fall RFP cycle. We make award decisions, and then those awards are announced, let's say February or March. So anticipate this coming February or March to get an understanding of awards funded through that program. The other sort of complement on our EPA funded program side of things here in the Chesapeake is our small watershed grants program. Really can do and does everything that our INSR program does as well. And honestly, for the purposes of this audience and the effort here, I think you can sort of think of these programs as very equal to one another in terms of the kinds of work that can be funded. Small watershed grants, just a little bit different in terms of relatively smaller grant award sizes. So awards ranging from $150,000 up to $1 million for projects that are actually implementing non-point source pollution controls. We also offer through that small watershed grants program a planning and technical assistance track for grants of up to $150,000. Generally, our programs are aimed at actually delivering practices on the ground. This planning and technical assistance track does provide a mechanism to be able to support a pretty broad range of planning, design, engineering, permitting kinds of activities that are sort of necessary antecedents to actual construction and delivery of practices. So that's certainly an attractive kind of element of that small watershed grants program. If, let's say, you're a little bit earlier stages in projects, certainly as we've heard about, for example, some other programs require things like designs and permits to be completed. That planning and technical assistance track is a great resource to be able to kind of get some funding to kind of get projects to a stage of maturity where they might be either eligible or more competitive for maybe some of these kind of larger, more institutional sources of funding. Other thing about small watershed grants program is the eligibility is a little bit tighter. Certainly a great fit, and between nonprofits and local governments, that's kind of the core in terms of who we're serving with these programs. So great fit based on the audience here on the line. Also has a much reduced match requirement. In fact, we really don't have a match requirement in that program at all. We use this language around matches encouraged but not required, and there's a fair bit of flexibility that we have there. So also for this program, if you have some issues or concerns being able to generate non-federal match, it can be a good resource. Versus our INSR program, the small watershed grants program has a spring RFP cycle. So actually that one will be opening here in about 2 months in early January. So great timing for this webinar to get folks kind of thinking about that program as a potential fit for project opportunities. Proposals will be due probably sometime in April of next year. And then awards are finalized and communicated out to folks in August. So a little nod to the timing there. I mentioned again, this is just these two programs that you're seeing on the screen are really just for the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Would encourage folks to go to nifwif.org. We've got some great sort of resources and ways to navigate to additional programs, but I will mention again our Central Appalachia Habitat Stewardship Fund program. That is a great resource for similar efforts on the western side of the Commonwealth here, and then our Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund as the complement on the eastern third of the state here. Go to the next slide. And one thing we've made very effective use of, and our applicants certainly make very effective use of, is we're a relatively lean and mean staff here administering our Chesapeake programs here at NIFWIF on our Chesapeake side of things. So you've got some staff contact information there, but I want to draw folks specific attention to these field liaisons. We have contracted with a number of individuals and firms that have individually and collectively decades of experience kind of building and managing watershed and water quality improvement projects on the ground. We enlisted them as contractors to really support applicants, help to sort of cultivate project ideas, provide really excellent, meaningful feedback and support in the development of proposals. All of these folks also just have a really good sense of a lot of the other resources and programs that have already been mentioned and will be mentioned moving forward here. So they're not necessarily just for the purposes of our program and putting proposals together for our program, but they've got enough expertise and insight and really kind of potentially how to package different sources of funding together to be able to get work done that you need to get done. So you got a list of all of the appropriate contacts here for our Chesapeake programs. I'd specifically direct your attention based on your geography and sort of the focus of the content here today on a couple. So Liz Feinberg is actually based in Chester County. So she's there in Pennsylvania, has got a lot of expertise on the stormwater side of things. Dave Hirschman is similarly a stormwater expert that we've enlisted here for our program. And then Katie Imbolsky is based in Bollesburg. She's got very deep connections and a lot of context around work happening really across the state. She actually also serves as a field liaison for our Central Apps program. So would very strongly recommend folks take advantage of these field liaison contacts to be able to just make a connection. They'll be ready and willing to help you out, sort of conceptualize projects, even answer basic questions about, is this project a fit? What could I do to strengthen it? Those kinds of things. So definitely want to encourage folks to make use of those. We have similar sort of functions and field liaisons for our Delaware program as well. So again, navigate to nifwif.org. We've got a program finder sort of tool that folks can use to be able to navigate to the appropriate program. You'll get all the relevant RFP information, contact information, et cetera. And last thing I would just say is, in the spirit of this slide, we attempt to be a very open door with prospective applicants. I think we actually really benefit, we all benefit from having conversations. We don't typically have mandated pre-proposals or mandated consultations, but we are very much interested in talking to folks about potential project ideas. Before you get started, I think there's a lot to be said about catching us early, talking about a project. If it's not a fit, it saves you time putting an application together. And almost without fail, those conversations yield great feedback that ultimately leads to, a more competitive proposal coming into our doors. So with that, I will stop and wait to see if we get any questions in.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jake. Next, I want to hand it off to Terry Provost, who is the program manager for the Community Development Block Program, also known as CDBG at PADCED. So I'll hand it off to you, Terry.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Terry Provost. I'm a certified floodplain manager. I am the Community Development Block Grant, one of the largest block grants around under Housing and Urban Development, HUD. I'm the manager at DCD, the Department of Community and Economic Development. Next slide, please. CDBG programs are funded through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. In the state of Pennsylvania, we have something called Pennsylvania Act 179, which is essentially a mini entitlement program. So DCD has several grantees in rural Pennsylvania that submits applications for infrastructure needs. That could be water, sewer. It can also be things like public service. They are entitled to those funds every year, and it is driven by the units of general local government or municipalities, counties, and cities. Next slide, please. CDBG's purpose is really to support community development activities to build stronger, more resilient communities. There are essentially under 24 Part 570 of the federal regulations under Housing and Urban Development, 26 activities that are actually identified. For the most part, almost anything you could think of is eligible for CDBG funding, with the exception of things like general government purposes. Maintenance is also ineligible. New housing construction is not eligible. So it's a pretty broad grant program that can help you with your needs. Next slide, please. Now, the CDBG activities must meet one of 3 national objectives. Since this is HUD money, we want to make sure we have predominantly benefiting low to moderate income persons, and that's defined as area median income being 80% or lower, aid in the prevention of slum and blight, or meet a need of a particularly urgency like COVID or disasters like flooding. Next slide, please. In 2024, DCD received about $40.8 million. $34.66 million was allocated to our entitlement communities, and almost $5 million was set aside for competitive awards, and then DCED also has a 3% cap on admin and technical assistance for our work that we do at DCED. Next slide. DCD provides CDBG funding for the smaller rural communities across Pennsylvania. There are many communities that do not receive allocations from DCED, and those are larger communities like State College Borough, the city of Philadelphia, larger counties like Allegheny. Next slide, please. You'll see a map here of Pennsylvania CDBG Act 179 communities. So these communities, which are kind of highlighted in blue here, are communities that work directly with DCED to obtain their funding for eligible fundable activities. Next slide, please. We review about 82 applications each year for 190 grantees. Applications were due in early November. Staff are reviewing those currently, and on average, each application, whether it's for a county, a city, they on average have about 5 activities per allocation for applications. So that could range from housing rehabilitation to public services to water infrastructure needs. Next slide. 12% of the funding, as we indicated, about $5 million is set aside for competitive allocations. They are due in February each year. There is a minimum request of $100,000, but there is no maximum request. Our priorities are outlined in our action plan, and this year they are water and sewer projects, which is typical for CDBG, community revitalization, public services, and resiliency projects. Next slide, please. So we're going to turn our focus a little bit into CDBG CARES Act, or coronavirus response. Next slide. The same mission on CDBG applies to the CV funds as well. However, these funds were to prepare, prevent, and respond to coronavirus. There are 26 eligible activities. Next slide. The allocation breakdown of the CV funds that we've received, and we are still working through those fundings. The total allocation was $96.1 million. 23.9 were entitlement allocations through Act 179, and then we had competitive awards of $65.7 million, and then the technical assistance as well. Next slide. Disaster recovery is sort of unique in CDBG. After a disaster, if it's proclaimed federally or gubernatorially, allocations of DR funds could be allocated. We are currently working through the IDA allocation. There was flooding in many areas in 2021, and DCD received those applications in August. We are also looking at the federal government on Tropical Storm Debbie as well. Those funds may be received in the future. These activities are a little different than typical CDBG. They can include things as far as even new housing construction, but they often include housing rehab, housing acquisition or buyouts, multifamily rental rehab, infrastructure, and mitigation. Next slide, please. $57 million was received by DCED for our rural communities that were received damage from Tropical Storm Lee and Hurricane Irene. There is a little bit of funding remaining that communities are working through currently. We also received $38 million in 2021 for Hurricane Ida. And as I mentioned earlier, this is issued by HUD when there is a presidential disaster declaration. Next slide. Funding for IDA identified the following eligible counties: Bedford, Bucks, Chester, Delaware, Montgomery, and York. Those funding awards are all made through a competitive application process. Section 108 loans, Housing and Urban Development has a focus on Section 108 loans. They continue to have this focus, and what a 108 loan does is essentially upfronts CDBG allocations to communities so they can get a project done with all funds in hand a little bit quicker. This enables state and local governments participating in CDBG to get this guaranteed loan to fund large economic development projects and undertake revitalization activities. Next slide, please. There are a couple of resources here, and I believe, will all receive these PowerPoints. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Yes, I do want to point out that everyone will be receiving the webinar recording along with these presentations. So all these great resources that the presenters are sharing now, you will have access to. I'd now like to welcome Linda Thomas at USDA. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to you, Linda.
Good morning or good afternoon. Next slide. Like Navina said, my name is Linda Thomas. I'm the Water and Environmental Program Director for USDA located here in Pennsylvania. We administer the Water and Waste Disposal Program, which is the only federal lending program exclusively focused on the rural water and waste infrastructure needs of rural communities under 10,000 population. We fund drinking water, wastewater, solid waste, stormwater. Eligible entities include the public bodies, nonprofit organizations, and Native American tribes and organizations. Next slide. Currently, our interest rates are listed there. We do change our interest rates quarterly. Our loan terms are 40 years. It's based off the 2020 US Census, median household income. That's where the 3 tiers come into. Next slide. Grants are made in conjunction with direct loans. It's in order to achieve reasonable user rates for residential users. Priority is given to the smallest, most needy communities with health and sanitary issues and state and federal regulatory agency compliance issues. Consideration for grant funding is usually based on 1.5% of the median household income if the monthly user rates are over that. Next slide. Okay. We do have area specialists throughout the entire state. They are with you throughout the entire project from application to construction. Projects are to be completed within 3 years of obligation of funds. We take applications based on a conceptual basis. Design and permits are not required for our program. Subsequent funding requests are given priority if needed after bid opening. Applications are submitted through our online program, RD Apply, and they are accepted year-round. There are no cutoffs with us. We do not require matching funds for our program, but we can be considered for non-federal programs as matching funds. Rural Development is also a basic federal agency for the ARC grant program. Next slide, please. We do have 2 pre-development grants. One is our SEARCH, which is Special Evaluation Assistance for Rural Communities. For communities less than 2,500, they must also be in the poverty. Max grant for this is $30,000 and there is no match. It covers different feasibility studies, design, engineering assistance. The PPG or pre-development planning grant is for population 10,000 or less. It has a maximum of 60,000 or 75%. There is 25% match requirement with that grant program. Next slide, please. We do have the ECWAG or Emergency Community Water Assistance Grant. Water transmission up to 150,000, water source grants up to 100,000. However, these do need to be qualifying events, emergency qualifying events. However, a federal declaration is not required. Such events would be drought, earthquake, flood, tornado, hurricane, chemical spills, leakage, seepage, disease outbreak. I suggest contacting a local area specialist to be able to discuss if you think that something qualifies. Next slide, please. We also have the 1RD Guaranteed Loan Initiative. The population for this is 50,000 or less. The lender is the applicant. So this is a more streamlined program 100% financing. Bank sets the interest rate. It is 100% financing. 50 million is the limit. Typically with our direct program, we have our state engineers that need to review and approve all of the engineering documents that go along with the project. With a guaranteed loan, that is waived. Typically, the lender takes care of that. Less government oversight. We can also refinance existing loans or direct loans. The processing time for these are typically 30, 45 days. It's based on the lender processing time. However, all of our programs do have to follow the 1970 environmental regulations. Next slide, please. We do have a couple side programs. We have a technical assistance that Pennsylvania Rural Water Association and RCAP Solutions. They receive technical assistance financing from us to be able to help those systems that are funded through us with their operational needs. We do have a Section 504 home repair program through our housing department that can help homeowners with connection to public water, public sewer, anything like that. The loan program is 1% for 20 years. There is grants for elderly, very low income. RCAP Solutions also has an individual household well and septic program, that is processed through our agency. However, it is through RCAP. Next slide, please. We do have federal requirements that we do have to follow. The American Iron and Steel requirements that was enacted in 2019. All of our projects need to adhere to that. In addition to, next slide, please, the Build America, Buy America. And that's why we have our state engineers to be able to help the consulting engineer through all of this, the federal requirements on that. Next slide, please. Like I said previously, all of our programs have to adhere to the NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act regulations. We do have a couple tiers. Typically, this is what takes the longest in our application process. The consulting engineer would have to develop the environmental report to submit to us for review and concurrence. Next slide, please. This is the listed state office contacts, of course, myself. We have Ivy and Sean. Sean is a senior loan specialist. We have 2 state engineers that cover the different counties within Pennsylvania. We now have 2 environmental protection specialists that are able to help out. Next slide, please. We have 6 local offices throughout the state. Those are the listed specialists, their address, phone numbers, contact information. Next slide, please. These are the counties that they cover in those area offices. Next slide, please. And that wraps that up. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Linda. So last but not least, I want to hand it off to Gianna, who will be talking about the EPA's Thriving Communities Grant-Making Program, and then that will be followed by a Q&A moderated by my colleague, Ellen Kohler.
All right, thanks Navina, and hello everyone. I'm Gianna Rosati. I'm the grant coordinator in EPA Region 3 Environmental Justice Division. Like Navina said, I'm the last presenter here, so I'll get through my slides quickly so that we can get to the question and answer session. But for my portion of today's presentation, I'll be discussing the Thriving Communities Grantmaker Program here in Region 3, which is through Green and Healthy Homes Initiative, or GHHI. Next slide. So the grantmaker organizations will provide grants to eligible subrecipients for assessment, planning, and project development activities. Grantmakers will alleviate the challenges that resource-constrained, community-based organizations have when applying for federal funding to ensure that grant funding is getting to the communities that are most in need. Next slide. GHHI has approximately $40 million to distribute to 171 grant projects benefiting disadvantaged communities around Region 3. The GHHI team and their technical assistance providers are available to help support applicants and those selected for funding throughout the entire process. And this is a really exciting time to share information on these subgrants, as the first due date for applications is over a month away, and the final due date is April 2025. So there's actually plenty of time, depending on what type of project you're looking into or interested in, to begin preparing your applications. It's not too late right now, but I'll get more into timing in a few slides. Next slide. So the advisory board will be involved throughout the entire process to ensure that the grant award and project implementation is equitable and transparent. Next slide. And as I mentioned, GHHI has core technical assistance partners to provide TA throughout the life of the projects. Next slide. All right, so of the subgrants available, there are 3 competitive tiers. The first is up to $150,000. Tier 2 is up to $250,000, and Tier 3 is up to $350,000. For organizations that are severely capacity constrained, there will be a small portion of non-competitive grants that will be up to $75,000. Next slide. Here's a summary of the expected number of grants per tier and the grant duration. Just to note that this is what's expected for each grant type, but is subject to change based on what applications are actually submitted for each tier. Next slide. So here's some examples of project activities by tier. For Tier 1, it's primarily work to gather data, begin educating community, or designing your project. Tier 2 gets more in-depth, working on developing partner relationships, performing more concentrated outreach. And Tier 3 is for project implementation and development. But as you can see, for all 3 tiers, they can be used for a variety of other purposes. Next slide, please. So the purpose of these subgrants is to focus resources on historically disproportionately affected communities. And this is a really unique opportunity because of the wide range of project possibilities. So I won't go through the list here, but this is non-exhaustive and can include others that are not outlined here. All right, next slide. So these are the eligible entities to apply for this funding. Just be sure that you're in Region 3. If you're not sure about your organization's eligibility, I just recommend contacting GHHI. I have their information at the end of these slides. Next slide, please. All right, so for timing on the request for applications, as I mentioned, now is the time to begin your application, or if you're not ready for a 2-year project period, there's plenty of time to prepare. For any of the 2-year project periods, applications will be due December 30th. This was originally extended from November 30th. And for any of the 1-year project periods, they will be due April 30th of 2025 or on a rolling basis prior to then. Next slide, please. Applications are designed to be low barrier with optional templates and a limited amount of questions. There's an online platform where they can be submitted. And if a community does not have that capability, GHHI can work with them to submit a mail-in option. Next slide, please. GHHI is keeping the application review and award process very quick moving and transparent. A debrief may be requested for non-awarded projects, and then applications can then be resubmitted one time if it is before the end date for applications. Next slide. I encourage anyone that's interested in learning more to visit GHHI's website for application resources, assistance with the RFA, FAQs, and they also have a team of support for available office hours. Next slide. And lastly, just sharing some resources here for their webpage, their link to sign up for their email distribution list, and list of TA providers and their advisory board. So that's all I have, and I'll turn it back to you, Navina. Thank you.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you so much, Gianna, and to all of our presenters. I'll now hand it off to Ellen, who will be handling Q&A.
Great, thank you again. And we do have a couple of questions, and I'm going to ask a few myself. If you have other questions that you'd like to have addressed, please feel free to go ahead and put them in the Q&A or the chat, and we can circle back to them. I'm going to first go to a couple that have come up for specific individuals. Linda, did you have something you wanted to add to your comments? You have your hand raised.
No, I don't. I'm sorry.
Okay, no worries at all. So we had, Jake, we had one question for you, and that is whether if you could provide just a few more details what field liaisons can do to assist applicants.
Yes. And I just typed the response, so hopefully folks can see that as well. So yeah, so our field liaisons, this question sort of came, let's see, I want to pull it back up just so that I'm looking at it correctly. Came also sort of in follow-up to a broader question in terms of, there's a whole range of kind of support that's needed to be able to effectively pursue grant funding, right? There is just the actual work of writing a grant application and, running the numbers to develop a budget, those kinds of things. Our field liaisons don't directly support or can't directly sort of do that for or on behalf of an applicant. So they're not going to be your place to go to write an application, that kind of thing. But they have all the expertise that's necessary to be able to help answer questions, aside from sort of the substantive or programmatic, you might say, of, hey, this practice in this place, or, how much nutrient load reduction could I expect if I tried to do this? But all of the ins and outs of, federal administrative and financial compliance, contracting processes, budgeting. They're expert resources to be able to help sort of answer questions and sort of walk folks through, different alternatives, different options. They can't write the proposal for you, but they can kind of do everything in terms of providing advice and consult up to that point. And again, I would say they work for us in our programs. There's not really a clean way for us to know, if they're going to take an hour meeting with you, that they're spending that full hour talking about the NIFWIF program versus a Growing Greener program or versus CDBG program. So take advantage of their kind of broad expertise to the extent it's relevant for any of these other programs as well.
Great, thank you, Jake. And there was a sort of a more general question about what the finance centers, and frankly, I'm going to guess any of the TA providers can do to assist low capacity eligible applicants in terms of writing grants. So Jake just sort of laid out that those field liaisons can, be right there next to you as you're working on those grant applications, but not actually do the specific application and submission. I would say that that's true also for the water technical assistance, environmental finance centers. So we're happy to be with communities to help them identify funding opportunities, to work through what's required for that funding opportunity. But we want to be building the capacity of those communities to actually be able to do this process again on their own. So we're not going to, we won't take on that role of writing the grant for the community, but we will partner with the community to write that grant. So I hope that's helpful. I think I think that's sort of the framing that a lot of the technical service providers are trying to pursue right now, so that we can help communities, so that the next time it doesn't seem quite as big a hurdle to look at a grant application and go ahead and submit it on your own. Shane, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, for our programs that we have, the same thing you're saying. We do have the watershed managers that can assist with the oversight on how to go through the grant process, give you suggestions on making that more competitive. But also there is trainings and stuff that we do have on those websites that I brought up to be able to kind of guide you through the process on what to look at. So please take advantage. I think some of those same guidances would help you with the general filling out a grant, how to do that. So
Yeah.
please take the opportunity to utilize those.
Yeah, and I do want to point out there are each one of these programs has a slightly different, rules, whether it's about match or about indirect costs or things like that. And we're happy to work with communities to talk through all of those sort of what are the specific requirements here and there and how to put the budget together and things like that. The question also went to after the grant has been successful and awarded, and whether the technical assistance is available for managing invoices and payments and things like that. That is not in our scope for our water technical assistance. It may be for some of the other technical assistance providers that, you know, are specific to a program, but it's not within our scope to be directly working on invoicing and payments. We can help walk communities through that again, you know, like being supportive in terms of helping address questions, but we're not going to, that's not part of our scope to be actually working on those kinds of details in terms of the after award. I don't know if so we had, I hope that's helpful in terms of answering that question. We did have another question specific to PennVest. So Tess, is PennVest offering both a loan and a grant opportunity?
Excellent question. So PennVest is primarily a low interest lender. We do have grant possibilities. What we do in particular, we have PFAS and PFOA grant money that is specifically allocated in the infrastructure bill money, the federal infrastructure bill money. That money is going out as all grant until we run out, and then we subsidize with low interest loan, right? So that money is divided between each board meeting. And then if we get 10 applications in for that, everybody gets a little bit of grant with the subsidized with a low interest loan. So their project is whole. Other than the PFAS, we run a financial analysis. We take a deep dive into your financial statements to see if you can financially handle the annual debt service of a low interest loan. If you can, you get low interest loan. If you can't, you get maybe grant or a loan grant combination. So other than the PFAS, you should anticipate a low interest loan grant combination if you're eligible for grant out the gate based on your financial statements. So financially distressed communities, systems, that kind of thing, typically are the ones that get the grant money.
So I wanted to circle back to a question about the interest rates, because Linda, it looked to me like USDA's interest rates are maybe a little bit higher, but your loan periods are 40 years. And PennVest, it looks like your interest rates might be a little bit lower, but have a shorter loan period. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yes.
Okay.
Our loan terms are 40 years. We have no repayment, early repayment penalties or anything like that. In fact, we look at the loans once they're in the servicing. Once the project's done, everything, we look after 6 years to see if they can graduate, and then every 2 years after that to see if they are able to get better rates and terms to refinance.
And, you know, as you pointed out, Linda, of course, the USDA program also is sort of geared towards certain kinds of communities in terms of population size and rural characteristics. So there's that too. Yeah, Tess.
So PennVest rates right now are between 1% and 2.179% based on the county cap rates of where you live.
Right.
If you get a loan grant combination based on financial need, that interest rate is reduced to 1% across the whole term. That if we run out of grant money, then what we typically do is extend the term out to as long as 30 years. And again, I'm not going to bore you with all those steps, but there's a lot of steps in there. And, you know, that's how we determine who gets the funding and how, what kind of term and interest rates that they receive.
Okay, thanks. We had another question. I think this is pretty much for everybody about using fiscal sponsors in applying to your programs. Can you, let's see, if we can go in the order that you guys presented, if you can just comment on using fiscal sponsors and whether you can or can't with your program. So Tess, do you want to go first?
I'm not sure of the term fiscal sponsors, I guess is the question.
So, if an organization, maybe doesn't have is maybe a nonprofit that doesn't have a lot of capacity, they might have another organization that will manage the money for them, but the nonprofit is going to do the work, for example.
Okay. PennVest requires,
I suppose a fiscal sponsor could also be, for example, a county. So go ahead.
So PennVest requires that the applicant owns, operates, or maintains the system that they're applying for the improvements for. So if you have a leaseback situation, we can work with typically either community. The only thing that we stray from that from is if we have a farm coming in, or a farmer typically doesn't have that ability to manage an application and disbursement. In that case, we can allow the municipality to sponsor that project, as well as a conservation district or some other form of government entity.
Okay, great. Thanks. Shane, what about for Growing Greener and the 319 grants?
Under Growing Greener 319, normally what happens is the grantee is responsible for fiscal oversight and management, but we do see that a lot of times they work with their contractor, either their engineer or their contractor in general to assist with the financial and program oversight. So we see that a lot. Also, many times we have grantees who are municipalities or conservation districts that the organization can work with. They'll be the sponsor, and if they can get one of those individuals, they'll do the assistance for getting that paperwork together and following up on the financial and that type of stuff. So, I mean, we're limited to 501c3s and government entities. So they generally have a better understanding. So partnering with them in order to meet your obligations is what I would recommend.
Jake, I think you were next, right?
Yes. Yeah. So great question. Short answer is yes, absolutely. We see that. And that's also another way that our field liaisons can also help is, basically identifying a potential right project or a need that's out there, but either, there may just not be a known eligible entity. There might be some question in terms of their capacity to implement. So service that our field liaisons can provide, and just more generally, yes, fiscal agency, fiscal sponsorship, very common, a great tool to be able to directly support both just getting resources into the hands of, worthy, needy projects. I would also say that something that I haven't talked about here really at all, but just know as well that, capacity building generally to support, ability to effectively manage federal funding is absolutely sort of a part of what we do. And so, partnering with a broader fiscal sponsor or a fiscal agent beyond just the transaction of being able to get the grant funds, we also see value in terms of helping to build the capacity of smaller, communities or organizations be able to sort of effectively sort of start to understand sort of the ins and outs and sort of what it takes to actually manage a federal award like this. So very happy to talk about that in more detail if folks have specific, cases that they want to kind of talk about.
Terry, what about for you?
Our eligible applicants are units of general local government, so we contract with governments. However, those governments can then subgrant to nonprofits, and so they would work closely with their county in that contractual agreement.
Linda, what about for USDA programming?
Well, like PennVest, the applicants must own, operate, and maintain the system. Typically, with our applications, consulting engineers are required, so they're the ones that usually help the applicants through the entire process. We also have our specialists there to assist with any applications, any of the processes on that, all the way through servicing. I do want to point out that USDA does not allow payment to grant writers per se. That's out of our federal regulation. We cannot allow that.
Okay, great. And Gianna, how about for EPA and the Thriving Communities? Grant
Yeah,
makers?
so like I said, that these grants are designed to be low barrier applications for communities and nonprofits to build capacity. I believe a fiscal sponsor would be eligible. I would just want to double check with GHHI to be sure, but they also have technical assistance providers throughout the life of these projects to also help build that capacity and manage various aspects like that.
Jane, did you have something else you wanted to add?
Yeah, if I can find my mute button. Yeah, the one thing that you also want to be aware of that if you are a grant recipient under our program, there is a grant advisor who would be following you throughout that process. So if there are any questions, comments, or anything like that, those types of things, those individuals will assist with that process as well. So there's 6 of those across the state, and like I stated before, conservation districts are in each county. They're also a good resource to assist with that process.
Great, thank you. We had a question about determining eligibility for the Thriving Communities through GHHI. So are we using the EJ screening tool? And if so, what particular parameters? Are they socioeconomic indicators or the environmental justice indices? And do you have to meet a certain like percentile number? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, that's a great question. So EJ Screen is typically the tool that's used. One thing to note though with eligibility is that if your organization isn't based in a technically disadvantaged community on the map, but will benefit a disadvantaged area, then that would still be eligible. So based on your address or where you're located, you still may be eligible. There's more information on this on GHHI's website. And I would recommend just working with someone from the GHHI team to walk through this directly with you. I don't want to misspeak, and they're available with office hours and are very quick to respond with email, phone, whatever you may want to reach out to them for.
That's really great to hear because I know that for some communities, they have, like their overall MHI, median household income might be at a certain level, but they have a lot of people who are much lower and then a few people who are much higher so that their median is,
Yeah.
place that, so it sounds like for some communities, it might be beneficial to reach out and ask those kinds of questions because if the project is going to serve part of the community that would definitely meet the definition. Okay, that's good to know. That's really, really helpful.
Great.
We had one question about whether these programs are available to communities outside of Pennsylvania. This is a national TA provider who was asking this. And I mean, I think generally most of these programs are, but they just have a different sort of look in that particular state. So the state revolving fund, each state has a state revolving fund. There's a USDA program. There's, community development block grant programs. The EPA's Thriving Communities is throughout the country, as are the 319 program. I think NIFWIF is probably just the presenter here that has a varying scopes depending on the program, I guess is what I would say, Jake, right? Like you've got plenty of programs that span the country, but in this case, you were talking about the Chesapeake, but there are plenty of others that hit other parts of the country. As you said, that you mentioned the Delaware Watershed Conservation Fund and others too, yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, we're generally organized at 2 levels. I mean, most of what we do is sort of organized around sort of key geographies or landscapes. So our Chesapeake program, our Delaware River Watershed program. We do have a couple other national programs that may be relevant here. One is our National Coastal Resilience Fund program, which, despite the name, there's a fair bit of Pennsylvania that is actually eligible and within sort of the program boundary. So that program is really focusing on sort of natural and nature-based solutions to resilience, but certainly maybe alignment with integration with more traditional sort of water infrastructure needs or sort of broader opportunities. So that's an example. And then we also have it's called the America the Beautiful Challenge, really kind of focused on kind of large scale, landscape scale, sort of restoration and conservation. Again, on the water side of things, there's perhaps a resilience connection, but also sort of on the non-point source side, some connections to be made. Those are national programs, right? And so, part of the reason I think we tend to focus or start with the programs that are in your backyard is that those are dedicated resources that we can't spend outside of, let's say, the Chesapeake Bay watershed, for example. So it's just while funding might be sort of relatively less, it's, on a much smaller geographic scale. So those are national programs. They're highly competitive, but one of the roles that I play as well is kind of helping to liaise between folks in my sort of geography and some of these national programs. So again, nifwif.org, you can get a sense of kind of our broad sort of our national programs that are out there. If you have questions, I would encourage you can, contact some of those national program contacts, but it's probably even better to start with me as being someone who can sort of translate and kind of make sure it's worth your time to be able to pursue an application or at least a conversation for some of these national programs.
Great. So Terry, I had one quick question for you, if you don't mind. You mentioned the CDBG disaster recovery funding and that infrastructure can be included. So I assume, of course, water infrastructure. And I believe you said something about mitigation. So can you talk just a little bit about, and maybe just give an example of if you have one, of a mitigation project? I'm just wondering if it needs to mitigate the impacts of the disaster that's already happened, or whether it could be mitigation so that maybe the community would be better situated for a similar kind of disaster in the future.
Yeah, excellent question, Ellen. So with disaster recovery funding, those funds have to have a nexus to the disaster itself. So for IDA, there has to be some sort of linkage to what you're trying to do will go back to the disaster that happened. But with mitigation, it's a little unique, and it is actually something new this year in the federal registers for the disaster recovery funds. There's actually a mitigation set aside of 15% per allocation. So HUD is saying, hey, when you're using disaster recovery funds, we want you to really be mindful of mitigation. So sometimes those things could look like could be like stormwater, so it's not directly flooding, but if it backs up, it impacts additional flooding. It could be things like elevating structures, homes, so that, yes, we got hit by Ida, but we're going to do housing rehabilitation and elevate the home to prevent future losses.
Great. That's really interesting. It'll be really great to see how those funds hit the ground in Pennsylvania. Shane, did you have something to add to that?
Yeah, I just got done doing a large scale project similar to what Terry was just talking about in Pennsylvania, actually in Schuylkill, where there was a disaster declaration. We joined funds between the state program and the DCD program in order to look at prevention, which was expanding into a floodway and expanding the floodplain to receive waters. We actually reduced the flooding to that community by over 18 to 32 inches because of the project that was combined, including wetlands, cells, those types of things. So think outside the box on some of this stuff that you may be able to match. Like, for instance, our grant was matched by the federal funds that came in. So those are some of the things that you really want to look at when you're doing this, because we have a 15% match. Theirs matched ours matched theirs, and it was great.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's a really great point. I think that goes across all of these programs. I mean, I know I've had conversations with Tess about the way that they talk to other agencies to see if they can fill the gaps for a community regarding a particular project. So, whoever you feel most comfortable reaching out to, start that conversation. And then we can also think about how we add to those funds that you might be able to access through that program. I think all the partners here are more than willing to help you out and help make those connections. We certainly are too at the Water Technical Assistance, EFC as well. I think with that, unless anybody else has any closing questions or comments, I think with that, we'll call it good. And thank you all very much for your time.